Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to have a panel of such illustrious and amazing folks who, between them, have tens of billions to invest in the venture ecosystem. So it'd be great to get their thoughts on how they're building the ecosystems as well as supporting funds and companies. So I'll start with a brief introduction about myself, and then perhaps we can go down the line and have each one of our illustrious guests introduce themselves. So I run a platform called Trusted Insight. It looks like a LinkedIn for LPs, but underneath it, we are building autonomous portfolios using AI and using proprietary data. We also manage a fund of fund that invests in new funds and have a program for investing in first-time fund managers where we, alongside our LPs, have invested close to $300 million in the last 18 months. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Manuel Caldeira to introduce himself.
Thank you very much. I'm Minister of Economics of Portugal, and we are living in a very interesting moment in Portugal. Both growth is recovering, but also we are living in an interesting moment for the ecosystem of startups and technological firms. What we are doing is not just watching, is trying to intervene in many areas, both on the skills, on talent, and also on the part of financing to promote and to boost this startup spirit, this entrepreneur spirit that is happening. We are also working on creating the right incentives, both in terms of finance incentives and fiscal incentives and labor and talent attraction incentives to guarantee that firms that want to accelerate in Portugal find a good place to accelerate and to grow and to create jobs in the country. This is what we are doing in the general. Then in the discussion, we'll check the different ideas. I lived in England, did my PhD in England.
Wonderful.
And before becoming a minister, I worked in the finance minister, in the economic minister, and worked in the academics for a long time.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Paul-François.
Hello, I'm Paul Fournier, sorry. I'm in charge of innovation within Bpifrance, and I was before in charge of innovation within Orange, the telco, so I'm not an investor. Sorry about that. I've made a lot of projects on innovation. Bpifrance is a sovereign fund, 20 billion euro under management. We are financing SMEs, 60,000 SMEs each year, and we are investing between 2 to 3 billion euro each year in all the kind of investment. Lots of fund of fund, direct investment in VC, mid and large cap. We made a huge effort since the creation of the bank 5 years ago to boost the French ecosystem on two directions. The first one was the creation of the French Tech, and that was to transform the spirit of entrepreneurship in France and to boost the ecosystem, especially in numbers of startup creation. To give you one figure, we are financing 1,500 startups in 2013. We will finance 4,000 this year. And also to boost the VC ecosystem, we push them to be much more international, to be larger, and the average size of the VC fund we are investing in has doubled in 3 years, which means that we want really the French VC ecosystem to be the leading ecosystem in the VC industry in Europe.
I'm Michael Lee. I'm from the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund, and we're a relatively new organization in that we were set up in 2014, so we're about 3 years underway. We have about 8.5 billion euros, which predominantly came from the government when it restructured what was previously known as the National Pension Reserve Fund, which ended up being used to recapitalize the Irish banks when they got into some difficulties in the 2010-2012 period. And the main mandate of the fund is to make commercial investments, but also then to have a strategic benefit to Ireland. And with that in mind, we have a pretty flexible investment mandate. So we can invest any part of the capital structure. We can invest directly or through funds. We can also invest for a very long period of time. There's no actual termination date on the fund. So some of our investments have been for up to 30 years. We also have the flexibility to what we call invest in big ideas. So we've put an allocation of about 10% of the fund towards what we think will be big opportunities. And the way we've looked at this is if we were to go back 20 years ago and try and find the investments that we should have invested in, what thought process would get us there. So for example, clearly the internet, when it started out in its early days, was highly innovative and transformed the world. Also, though, in other sectors, for example, aviation, Ryanair would have been a major disruptor. And we frequently run the test, well, if Ryanair walked in today, would we back Ryanair? And it looks easy with the benefit of hindsight, but it would have been a phenomenal investment. It would have transformed the economy from an economic generation perspective, given the number of tourists it brought to Ireland. But trying to think long term and try to identify if there's a disruptive player, how can that actually be harnessed for the benefit of both Ireland and obviously the ultimate consumer base more broadly than Ireland. We recognize we're a relatively small economy, so we have to think big picture and outward looking as we approach our investments. Our team, by and large, have come from various investing backgrounds over the years. Previously, I'd worked at Goldman Sachs in New York for 17 years, and most of the team has a similar type of background, and we try to do this with as much passion as we possibly can.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I know we have a great set of VCs in the house, and I think they're all of them very eager to understand your investment philosophies. We've seen a lot of sovereigns, your peers, open up offices in Silicon Valley. Do you have a presence in the Valley, or do you have a headquarter? And the second part of the question is, how are you investing? Are you investing in funds, fund of funds, direct companies, early growth? How are you supporting your ecosystems? Anyway.
We have both situations. We have invested in funds of VCs to invest in the startups in the Portuguese ecosystem. But we also created a 200 million fund now to co-invest with funds that want to invest directly in companies.
That's great, to reduce the financing risk.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
And if they invest directly in the companies, we co-invest with them the same amount. And then it's an asymmetric investment. We share the losses if there are losses, but we don't share the profits.
Wow.
If there are profits, we withdraw the money that we have put there. There's a very clear exit scheme, but we would just want a normal return for our money, because the aim of this fund is not to have huge profits. It's much more to diminish risks and build and reinforce the ecosystem by bringing investments of a later stage and by bringing professional investors that bring not only capital but bring knowledge, which is something that is very valuable. Knowledge how to invest in technology is something that I think in most European countries we are still missing, and it's very welcome to come. This is why we have constructed this fund with this asymmetric characteristic.
That is an amazing, innovation. And to the LPs and VCs in the house, you heard what Manuel said. If you invest in Portugal, you're basically doubling your carry. They're not participating in the upside, but they are limiting the downside and providing capital. So that's, huge congratulations to you on setting up this forward-looking program.
Thank you.
So to answer to your question, yes, we have someone from the bank in San Francisco, because we feel the ecosystem is, of course, very important, and the connection with the US especially is very important. On our side, the systemic approach is, of course, based on the fund of fund. We are investing in 100 VC fund in France, and the direct is a smaller part. We invest last year, I think, was 600 or 700 million euro in the fund of VC fund of fund activity, and the direct investment was less than 200 million euro. And clearly, we think that direct is interesting. We make money on direct. We love it, but we don't feel, of course, that the systemic approach is important. Our goal is to build a French VC ecosystem, an industry, a French industry of the VC. We feel this industry must be at least European. We push most of the VC funds we invest in to go in Europe, to invest across Europe. We push the best of them to go to the US. We invest in Franco-Chinese fund. Clearly, we feel the ambition is again to create an industry in France of VC.
Your global aspirations, you're looking for global companies.
Pure global. We feel that, again, this is a global approach, and we need to be global in the way we think it.
And I've been investing in Europe since 2005, where we had the privilege of investing with Index Ventures. And I've never seen as big global ambition and aspirations that I see today. So it's amazing how far the ecosystem has come up.
From an ISIF perspective, clearly Ireland is a very small economy, so by definition we have to look outward. We don't currently have offices overseas, but we do work very closely with the other state bodies that do have offices overseas. We've also made a number of investments directly into fund of funds that are based in other locations, and our basic philosophy behind that is to try and identify good investors who have great insight that we can either invest directly with them on investments they have, or alternatively, where we find situations that are of interest to us, we use them as a resource to try and see if these are actually of a sufficient standard. So it helps us when we don't have the expertise in a given area where and typically we will be a reasonably large investor in these funds, so we tend to get hopefully reasonable mind share amongst them as we're looking at these opportunities. We've made a couple of direct investments over the last couple of years that will probably get much bigger over time. One example is Movidius, which ultimately got bought out by Intel, but we'd invested in that initially through a fund, and then over time we'd invested directly in it as we got to know the company better. But we feel that direct investing is ultimately, the way we would like to have our money deployed in the very long run, but we realize that as a new fund we have to build up our own sphere of influence. And also from an Irish perspective, I think we want to work with the best in class investors out there and ensure that we're bringing the investments that we look at to a pretty high standard of review.
My question is, clearly as a sovereign, you have multiple goals or hats that you wear. So how do you look at both commercial and financial returns as well as strategic, and how do you balance the two?
In our case, the funds that we are promoted, we want them to be very market-oriented. So what we need to bring and to enlarge and to take further in Portugal is knowledge about investment in technology. We have very interesting startups, but a lot of them had to move to either England or the US to find investors when they start growing. And we don't want to put just money, we want to have money and knowledge. So we want these funds that we are funding with the fund of funds to be very market-oriented, to bring the knowledge of investors to Portugal. And also with this 200 million, 200M fund that we are creating, what we want is to co-invest with the best, so we'll be aware about certifying the investors, making sure that these investors were already certified internationally, not to have any bureaucracy around that. But if they are certified and have money and have knowledge, we want them to be the ones deciding in what to invest. Because I think this is what we want to boost in our ecosystem, is not just much more capital to invest, that is important of course, but is also more capital linked to more global knowledge. Our firms and startups have to be global, just like Ireland. It's a small country, a very open country, but we want them to be more global as well in attracting investment, and we want part of this investment to come directly to Portugal and without having to move headquarters to other places to find the investors.
That is a great program. I mean, it's really amazing that you are fostering the funds to be at a global standard from day one without giving them a crutch. That's again congratulations, Paul.
The first ambition is, I mean, we have a mandate from our shareholder, which is the state, to generate around 1 billion euro of revenue each year. And I don't know in Portugal, but the Minister of Economy of France is very keen to get the billion euro each year. So that's clearly what's the mandate we've got. Of course, in this around 5% return that we generate each year, we try to make sense, which means that we're going to invest, for example, in the seed, in the VC, where the return can be lower, and then make some better investment in the late stage to mitigate the risk and get this 5%. So financial return, and then, of course, the ambition of Bpifrance is to create an ecosystem which is larger than us, and then the growth of the ecosystem, the growth of the VC fund, the growth of the amount raised of the French VC industry is KPI that we follow, but we follow them as we get the billion euro in the bank, and then we can have a look to the rest of the impact.
Michael.
From an Irish perspective, our fund has to be commercial based on the legislation that the fund was set up under. So we have no choice but to do everything on a commercial basis. But in addition to that, we have what we call our double bottom line, that we have to achieve a strategic and economic benefit for Ireland. As part of that process, and the reason we want to do that is so that the fund, one, will be sustainable. If it's not commercial, ultimately at some point it won't be sustainable. But also there are world trade and EU rules that we need to navigate as well to ensure that we're never accused and don't want to cause any trouble for our investee companies with the accusation of state aid. And to that end, we actually do a formal internal review on every investment before we sign up to make sure that we have that completely papered off from a legal perspective, because we feel it's very important that we don't cause any challenges or issues for any of our investee companies or funds. In terms of how we want to do things over time, clearly, there's a number of dimensions. The economic impact is calculated very simplistically based on the positive impact on GDP in Ireland. But also that means things like jobs. It also means developing the right areas of the economy. So for example, food and agri is a very important strategic area in the Irish economy. We're fortunate in that we're one of the cheapest places to produce milk in the world, but we also then have a number of needs in terms of what we do with that raw material and processing. So we've spent a lot of time trying to develop the food tech space within Ireland, and then made a number of investments alongside investors who have a lot of credibility in that space. And I think it's important that maybe it's kind of a transition of governments more generally, that we're trying to be on side more with business, not only telling them what to do and trying to encourage them to do things, but actually putting our own money into the investments, which I think raises the stakes a lot and makes you feel a lot more committed to what you're looking for. And also from a government perspective, we can do a lot of things to be helpful with companies. For example, if someone's looking at a new technology, say for example in the healthcare space, we can coordinate with people in the healthcare department to see if there's a way that maybe they can do some pilot tests and solve problems that they have. For example, there are a number of conditions and diseases that affect people that cost the country a substantial amount of money every year. And we've been spending time with some of the biotech companies trying to figure out if we can come up with better solutions to patient management that will not only deliver commercial products, but also save money for the government in another aspect. But those products will be very commercial and viable in the regular market. And I think that's where the partnership between government and industry, I think, really starts to get motoring. And it's long overdue that we can get this harmony in place, because I think there've been different models, but I think this is, from my experience of it, this is a pretty good model, and we've had some pretty interesting outcomes so far.
Great, great. They say that Silicon Valley is not just a place, but a state of mind. And when I listen to these illustrious gentlemen, I see that they are creating Silicon Valley type ecosystems in their respective countries. And part of this is because of who they are. They have been captains of industry. So my question, Michael, you had an illustrious career at Goldman. You were at the upper echelons of academia in Orange. What is your personal story, and how do you attract top talent to the sovereigns for them to be successful?
I'll take that one to start. Personally, I went to New York for a year in the late 90s, and after 18 years thought it was time to potentially come home, given I have 3 young boys, and it was either going to stay in the US for another 10 years while they went through the education system or come home. And I thought it would be good for them to experience some of the what one can understand or learn as you grow up in Ireland. So that was one of the primary drivers for my thinking about where would I like to spend the next 10 years of my life. I think that at the time the government was setting up the Strategic Investment Fund, it seemed like a very interesting opportunity, something relatively unique. You don't get the opportunity to do something like that every day. And also I thought, given Ireland, having watched Ireland go through, pretty tough times from afar, I thought it would be nice to be able to do something back in Ireland where I could bring back some of the knowledge and learnings that I'd picked up over the years. And as part of the team, we've got a number of people in our team who all have strong backgrounds in industry. And I think it's no state secret we don't get paid the same as people get paid in industry, but I think we bring as much passion, if not more, because people genuinely believe in what they're doing. We've got a world authority on undersea fracking on our team. We've got people who've got serious expertise in the food and ag space. We've got people who have deep understanding of the real estate space and some of the other technology fields. So I think it's something that, like every business, I think ultimately it's the passion. If people are just doing it for the money, you've hired the wrong team. That's my honest belief.
For me, my CEO was CFO of Capgemini, and he was CEO of Wanadu, and I used to work and run the DSL business in Wanadu, and he called me and I say, you need to come, and you can resist to Nicolas Dufourcq, so I just joined. I think the way you attract people is first one, we get a lot of young people and we train them a lot, and they are making a lot of deals compared to their peers. So clearly we have a deal where they stay 5, 6, 7 years. Sometimes they stay 20 years, but they learn a lot, and we are happy about that, and we get a lot of connection with the private VC. And exactly like Michael said, I mean, that's passion. Bpifrance, we say the baseline is serve the future, and I think people and the young people are very keen to serve the future, and they are paid with not only money, they are paid with passion.
In my case, I was, before becoming a minister, although I have worked as a journalist and then as in the finance minister and in the economic minister, I was in academia, and I was in academia in these years of the crisis, and I saw a lot of this young generation in Portugal migrating to other countries in Europe. Because of the crisis, the huge increase in unemployment. Unemployment now came down a lot, and we were the second country in Europe that created more employment in the last 1.5 years, and that is quite good.
Wow.
But there's still a lot of things to be done. What happened with talent in Portugal is quite unique in Europe. We had a much older generation that is much less qualified. And if you look at our generation with 55 years or more, you'll see that the level of people with a degree is like 3 times lower than that of Germany, for instance. But if you look at people of 25 to 35, the number of people with a degree is higher than that of Germany.
Wow.
And even the percentage of people with, not the number, the percentage of course, the percentage of people with a degree in engineering, in software, in this kind of technical degrees is slightly higher than that of Germany. And that means that we have a lot of talent getting into an economic structure that was on a crisis. Now it's booming, but it was on a crisis, and also it was not fit because the older generations were less qualified, so the structure of the economy was not fit. This creates a unique opportunity. The opportunity that, although most European countries have a stable creation of talent, they have a structure that demands a lot of talent, and since most industries became more skill intensive, they have a lack of talent. We had a surplus of talent.
Wow.
And what we were seeing was, and in the universities you were seeing that, was talent fleeing away from the country. And this is, I think, what created a lot of ground for a lot of startups to start and to grow, but it also creating a lot of ground for attracting startups that are accelerating, and we have a lot of big companies and mid-sized companies that are technological companies that are accelerating, that are bringing part of their business to Portugal. Because of that, they find good quality talent at very competitive prices, and of course they find prices for headquarters and for offices that are very competitive as well. This is part of what is boosting the ecosystem, is also these firms that are coming to accelerate. They are not moving their headquarters, most of them. They are just moving parts of their activity where they find very good talent and very good opportunities. And they are coming from France, from the UK, from Spain as well, and from Brazil, for instance, which is quite interesting because it is creating also a very global and very interesting setting in Lisbon. But I think the way that we are doing, and we are making a lot of effort to retain this talent that we have, is to create these conditions of more funding, of better conditions for startups. We created an initiative called Startup Portugal that gave more strength to the incubators, for instance. And of course, we are also trying to attract investment to come to Portugal, either to start up here and to work with us, or also talent to attract investment of firms that are accelerating. And sometimes they have 10 million or 15 million to accelerate, and they can take much further those 10 or 15 million if they invest in Portugal, especially in areas where we have a lot of talent. They can do that in a more competitive way.
That is great news. I'm convinced. So will you take a company from Silicon Valley too, so we can get some data scientists and full stack engineers? Because I know there is no surplus of those in Silicon Valley.
We have taken a few already.
Awesome, wonderful, wonderful. Great, that's amazing. So I know we don't have much time left, so maybe one last question would be, or do we, are we close to the end? Can we continue? Okay, maybe we go for one last question. Apart from providing, maybe again we can start with you, Michael. What are some of the value propositions of working with a sovereign? Why should funds and companies think of when working with a sovereign?
Well, I think one of the key benefits that we give people is there's an element of validation and branding on their business, particularly as they try to market overseas. We found a number of companies find having a sovereign on their roster can be helpful. Also, if there's potentially need down the road for a larger check, and we may be looking, we have the luxury of being able to look at investments across a number of different lenses. So we can look at it as a venture investment, we can also look at it as a later stage investment, all within the one fund, or even a very late stage investment. And I think that gives us the flexibility to be complementary to what the company would like to achieve over time. So I think having that flexible investor in the shareholder base can be very helpful. The other part as well is clearly we have access to a lot of parts of government where we can be helpful to try and develop products for the company. So for example, as I mentioned previously, the healthcare example, that's a huge problem for governments around the world. Things like, for example, type 2 diabetes is a huge issue. If there are ways we can try to figure out how to save money being spent on that and improve the outcomes for patients. And that's a great candidate for collaboration between government and the private sector, and having an investor alongside someone in the private sector in that sector could be very helpful.
I think for the GPs, I would say stability and long-term vision about the evolution of a fund. And for the direct investment, we make a huge effort to, because we are investing in most of the big company in France, like Orange, Valeo, and all the CAC 40. So we can make a very good connection for them with the CEO of their company, because we are at the board of those companies. So it's a huge part of the support we're providing to the direct investment we're doing out of being a long-term investor and quite stable, of course.
I do agree with all that was said. I think the first thing that the government with these funds have to do is to make sure it doesn't get in the way of the investors, doesn't get in the way of making, when they have to make difficult decisions. So this is the first thing that we have to make sure. The second thing, I think, is to make them, put them in contact with local knowledge, with local investors that can add to their knowledge and that can validate to the investors technologies or that have interesting startups. The last thing, and I think I really agree with what was said, is that we can, I think countries like Portugal, but of course France and Ireland as well, can in many cases be test beds for products that you want to test globally. And in some cases like else, but in many other cases, you can use these test beds by relating with government or with the state hospitals or schools or different institutions and make sure that your product has a first client to develop itself and then being launched into the world. And I think that is an important thing that we may add in this kind of investments. Parallel to this, what we are doing is we are trying to revise the laws and to create sandboxes for investments in key areas like driverless cars or cars without drivers, I mean, and different areas of where technology is evolving a lot and where regulations are not very clear, to make sure that our laws don't prohibit that innovation happens. And we can either do that by having a more clever regulation, which is what we are doing in some areas, and in other areas where it's not very well defined where the regulation is going still, I think we should have areas that allow for experimentation, even if in restricted areas, but not to have the regulations and the laws avoiding innovation. This is what we can help as well, and I think it's very important for the growth of the ecosystem.
Great, great. Do we have time for one more question? Or I think we're done. But I'd like to thank everyone, our illustrious panel, for sharing their time with us.